Is the election of Javier Milei as the leader of Argentina endangering China's lunar exploration program? At first glance, this could seem unlikely. China manufactures its own rockets, spacecraft, and payloads, and there's little reliance on foreign suppliers, and least of all Argentina, which is not really known for having an extensive space industry. But then factor in telemetry and control. Deep space missions generally rely on a series of ground stations with high-gain radio antennas to communicate with the Earth. This is the case, for example, for NASA, with such a network based in California, Spain, and Australia, and which support missions like the James Webb Telescope or Voyager, and last but not least, the upcoming Artemis missions. China has a similar network of ground stations called the Chinese Deep Space Network, with two major ground stations close to the cities of Jiaosu and Kashgar, respectively in the provinces of Heilongjiang and Xinjiang. But to maintain as much as possible continuous communications with deep space missions, China needed to establish a third major deep space ground station on the other side of the globe on foreign territory. To achieve this, in 2014, China chose to collaborate with Argentina. That year, the Chinese signed an agreement with the Argentinian government led by Cristina Kirchner, enabling China to lease a piece of land in the province of Neuquén in the north of the Patagonian desert for a period of 50 years. This is where the Chinese have built what is now known as Espacio Lejano Station, spanning an area of 200 hectares. At the heart of this installation is a massive 35-meter diameter radio antenna, in other words, basically the missing piece for the Chinese deep space network. This setup in Neuquén became operational in 2018 and reportedly played an important role in the Chang'e 4 and 5 lunar missions in 2019 and 2020, and will do so for the upcoming Chinese lunar and planetary exploration missions. But the recent election of Javier Milei could change everything.
Javier Milei has won Argentina's runoff presidential election.
Javier Milei won a convincing victory.
Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina.
Milei has been supportive of a pro-US foreign policy and adopted an offensive stance against China during his campaign, saying he was skeptical about, quote-unquote, working with communists.
Nosotros no hacemos pacto con comunistas.
During his election, Javier Milei threatened to cut ties with Brasilia and Beijing, called China an assassin, and has also been highly critical of the BRICS, of which China is a member. All of this may mean trouble for the Chinese station in Neuquén, especially since the station has been somewhat controversial already with a part of the Argentinian public, and also with some government officials in the country having suggested and speculated about the possibility of military surveillance activities taking place at the station. And in the past, some US government officials have also put their weight behind this narrative, concerned about the military potential of Chinese activities in Neuquén. So let's look at the options here. In the worst case scenario for China, the Argentinians remove Espacio Lejano Station completely. This may prove to be tricky, as the agreement between the Chinese and the Argentinians signed in 2015 covered a period of 50 years. But if this did happen, China's space exploration program would be put under pressure. The Chinese are launching an increasing number of missions in the coming years, such as the Chang'e 6, 7, and 8 lunar missions, a crewed lunar mission, the Tianwen-2 asteroid sample return mission, and the Tianwen-3 Mars sample return mission. And you also have to factor in past missions which are still active, like Chang'e 4 and Tianwen-1, which still need the deep space network to operate. And so a removal of Espacio Lejano Station could mean only intermittent communications between China and all of these spacecraft. In South America, China does have some additional ground stations in other countries like Chile, Brazil, or Peru, but they are all much smaller and not designed for deep space activities, and the same goes for China's Tianlian relay satellites in geostationary orbit. I think this kind of insecure situation is probably one of the reasons why China's Deep Space Exploration Laboratory is currently working on a deep space communications constellation called Queqiao and aimed to be deployed in the 2030s. In this plan, relay satellites placed in Earth-Moon Lagrange points, lunar orbit, and geostationary orbits would transmit communications between lunar spacecraft and the Earth, as well as providing positioning services and communications between the lunar spacecraft themselves. We're still probably roughly 10 years away from any of this seeing the day, But I think the benefit of this kind of infrastructure, especially if geostationary satellites are involved, is that there could be much less reliance on infrastructure built on the territory of a foreign country. Now, back to Argentina and the immediate future. Despite the heavy anti-China rhetoric of Javier Milei, I think that there's actually a good chance of nothing happening to the Chinese Espacio Lejano Station. I mean, Milei has a radical economic program which would involve implementing massive expense and tax cuts, as well as dollarizing the Argentinian economy. For this, he will probably need stability with his main trading partners, among which China is the second biggest. So it seems like in the short to medium term, realpolitik seems more likely to prevail, and that the Chinese deep space ground station in Neuquén could be here to stay. But as there's no guarantee, I'm also guessing that China is probably scrambling to put together a contingency plan at this very moment. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this episode or found it useful in any way, please consider supporting our independent coverage of the Chinese space program. And as always, I want to give a special shout out to all our patrons on patreon.com and YouTube memberships who make our episodes possible. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.